Welcome to The Dive. Today, we're getting into something really important for, well, anyone who's neurodivergent, especially if you have ADHD.
Hmm?
We're talking about navigating work, not just getting by, but actually, moving up in your career.
Yeah. And our main source today is a great conversation from Bawtman's Brain Banter.
Right.
The episode was called Level Up Your Career, ADHD at Work. Had Bawtman chatting with Susan, who's an ADHD advocate and a career coach, really knows her stuff.
Definitely. So what we want to do here is basically pull out the really practical, actionable bits from their talk.
Yeah, the key takeaways.
Exactly. Stuff you can use. Think job hunting, interviews, negotiating salary, even just making your day-to-day work environment, well, work for you, all through that neurodivergent lens.
Okay, so where do we start? Job hunting seems like the logical place.
Sounds good. Susan really hammered home the importance of self-awareness, which sounds obvious, but
Right, but it's deeper than just saying, I have ADHD.
hmm,
It's about knowing how it shows up for you, specifically at work.
like what?
Well, like Susan mentioned, maybe you actually thrive in really fast-paced, high-energy places.
Mhm.
Or perhaps you're brilliant at, brainstorming completely new ideas.
Or maybe the opposite, that ability to just zero in on tiny details when you're really engaged.
Hyper-focus, right?
Exactly. Knowing your specific pattern, that's ground zero. That's what you build on.
Okay, so you figure that out. How does that translate into, actually getting a job?
Yeah.
Susan talked about tailoring applications.
Yeah, absolutely. Forget the generic stuff. Your resume, your cover letter, they need to tell your story.
A professional story.
Right, not just a list of tasks you did.
Yeah.
Focus on accomplishments. What did you achieve? And use those strong action verbs Susan mentioned. Show impact.
Okay, and this is the part I found really interesting, flipping the script on potential challenges.
Reframing.
Yeah, hyperfocus isn't just getting lost in something. It's deep concentration that solves problems.
Yeah.
That out-of-the-box thinking, that's innovation fuel.
Precisely. But, and this is key, Susan pointed this out, you can't just say it.
You need proof. You need proof. Give concrete examples. Here's a time my different approach led to X positive outcome. Quantify it if you can. Numbers talk.
Okay, makes sense. So, you've tailored your stuff, it looks great, you land an interview, now what? Preparation, obviously. Susan was big on that.
Totally non-negotiable.
Mm.
Research the company, yes, but also really rehearse how you talk about your strengths.
And the weaknesses
Yeah.
or potential challenges.
Yeah, especially those.
Hmm.
How do you address things related to ADHD in a, positive and proactive way?
I liked her example about disorganization. Instead of just saying, yeah, I struggle with that.
Right, which doesn't help anyone.
You talk about the strategies you use, like I use digital planners or I break big projects down into smaller steps. Shows you're aware and managing it.
Exactly. It's not about pretending it doesn't exist. It's about showing you understand yourself and you've got ways to handle it professionally.
Okay. And then during the actual interview, any quick tips Susan mentioned?
Yeah, a few good ones. Don't be afraid to ask them to repeat a question or clarify something. It shows you're engaged, not that you weren't listening.
Good point.
And for fidgeting, which, can happen. Subtle grounding techniques, things nobody else would even notice, can really help you stay centered.
And being authentic, letting your personality show.
Oh, absolutely. Susan really stressed that. Trying to mask constantly is exhausting, and honestly, companies are starting to see the value in different kinds of minds, so be you.
Love it. Okay, fast forward, interview went great. You got the offer. Now, the salary talk. Often kind of awkward, right?
Can be, yeah. But Susan's advice here was really empowering. Starts with research. Know your worth.
How do you figure that out?
Use those online tools, Glassdoor, Salary.com, things like that. See what the typical range is for that role in that industry with your experience level.
You have a baseline.
Exactly. It's not just pulling a number out of thin air. It's data. It gives you confidence.
And she said, don't just focus on the base salary number.
Right. Look at the whole picture. What are the benefits like? Health insurance.
Mm.
How much paid time off? Is there budget for courses or conferences, professional development?
Flexibility, that seems huge, especially for neurodivergent folks.
Hugely important. Negotiating flexible hours or maybe some remote work days can be just as valuable, sometimes more valuable, than a slightly higher salary figure. It helps you create the work setup where you can actually do your best work.
Makes total sense. And like the interview prep, practice the negotiation part.
Definitely. Run through your points beforehand. What's your target? What's your walkaway point? What are your justifications?
Justifications based on.
Based on the value you bring.
Yeah.
Your skills, your experience, those unique strengths we talked about. Frame it that way. It's not just asking for money. It's showing why you're worth that investment to them.
Okay, cool. So let's shift gears a bit from getting the job to being in the job, day to day. Susan talked about creating a supportive workplace. What does that actually look like, especially for someone with ADHD?
Well, it goes beyond just, physical safety. It's about psychological safety. Feeling like you belong, like you can actually be yourself.
And practically.
Practically, things like clear expectations are huge. Knowing exactly what's expected for a task, predictable routines where possible can really help with focus.
Mm.
And minimizing distractions, that's a big one.
So accommodations, like what Susan mentioned.
Yeah, reasonable accommodations. Things like noise-canceling headphones are a classic example. Maybe flexible seating if moving helps you think. Permission for short movement breaks.
What about meetings? Sometimes those can be tough for processing info.
Totally. So maybe getting written summaries after meetings. These aren't like crazy demands. They're often simple things that make a huge difference in effectiveness and just, well, feeling okay at work.
But that relies on feeling comfortable asking, right? Disclosure.
It does. And that's a two-way street. Employees need to feel safe enough to talk about their needs. And employers, ideally, should be proactive and understanding about creating that inclusive space.
Which leads right into working with colleagues, specifically neurotypical colleagues. Communication seems key there.
Absolutely critical. Open and honest communication. And, if you're comfortable, maybe educating your immediate team a bit about ADHD and how you work best.
Like, hey, I process things better if I get instructions in writing, that kind of thing.
Exactly that kind of thing. It prevents misunderstandings down the line.
But it's not just on them to understand us, right?
No, absolutely not. It requires patience and understanding going both ways. Neurotypical folks might communicate differently, process information differently. We need to appreciate that too. Focus on the common ground, the shared goals, mutual respect.
And conflicts, because they happen.
They do. Susan's advice was, address them directly, constructively. Focus on the specific issue, not on the person or making broad statements. Keep it about the problem you're trying to solve together.
Okay, so let's try and wrap this up. If we boil down Susan's main points from that chat, what are the absolute must-remembers?
Okay, first, really get to know your own ADHD profile. At work, strengths, challenges, the whole deal.
Right. Self-awareness deep dive.
Then tailor everything, resume, cover letter, interview prep to highlight those strengths and show how you manage challenges.
Prepare, 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 especially for interviews and negotiation.
Know your market value. Negotiate confidently, thinking about the whole package, not just salary.
And advocate for yourself. Push for the support and accommodations you need to thrive in the workplace.
I think the underlying theme, really, is that neurodivergence isn't something to hide or fix. It brings unique perspectives, different ways of thinking.
Which are actual assets.
Exactly. Real assets in today's world.
So Susan's core message is kind of embrace who you are. Don't burn yourself out trying to mask all the time.
Yeah. Understand what you need. Ask for support that takes strength.
No.
It's not a weakness.
Definitely not.
Which kind of leads us to a final thought for you, the listener, to maybe chew on. Think about this. If workplaces really, genuinely embraced and supported neurodiversity, not just tolerated it, but actively supported it, how much more innovation could that unlock? How much more productive could everyone be?
Good question.
So maybe ask yourself, what's one small thing you could do starting today in your own job or field to either understand neuroinclusion better or maybe even advocate for it a little bit?